What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to another episode of the Tflip Show. I'm so happy you guys are here. I do want to say thank you guys for your patience, sticking with me. I know we're on a little bit of a hiatus there. Missed one upload, but we're here. We're now. Really excited for today's episode, episode 10. Got a good one for you guys today. I'm going to introduce you guys to a good friend of mine. Met him through my job, and on top of that, awesome dude, awesome story, Mr. Jason Inay. How's the last name pronounced?
Inay.
Okay, got it. Well, Jason's a badass son of a gun, guys. I mean, just to be right to the chase, dude is awesome. I mean, I'm so excited to share his story. So, Jason, I'll let you take the floor here and kind of introduce yourself and kind of let us know who you are.
So my name's Jason, and I teach martial arts. That's like the really short answer. I mean, I have a day job, and I have a varied work experience beyond that. But for the most part, I've been doing martial arts for 45 years, and I'm a lineage holder, which means that I'm in charge of a family system. So my teacher was my father, and he passed away in 2000. In fact, our memorial workout that we hold annually for the last 22 years is coming up on the 24th. So a little, 9 days away.
Yeah.
Now, so we do that every year. It's going to be a small one this year. COVID, a lot of people are still kind of nervous about doing group events and things like that. So we're not anticipating a very large following or attendance this time. But so I teach martial arts. Teach martial arts to civilians, children, a lot of regular people. But I've also taught law enforcement and military as well. And as I mentioned, I have a varied work experience. I was also doing security and law enforcement for a long time in getting to use a lot of the things that I learned and I teach today. So that's
awesome. So you said 45 years. I mean, rewind all the way back to year one. Let's look at the early life. How you found martial arts. What got you into it? I assume you mentioned your dad here. Mm-hmm. So let's run with that. Let's hear a little bit about it.
I literally have been doing martial arts longer than I can remember. There are pictures of me doing martial arts with my father, my uncle. There was Super 8 video. A lot of that is deteriorated, although we've been able to capture some of that on VHS and then on digital now as we restore that content. But there are a lot of pictures and things of me doing martial arts with my father and his teachers and his students. I don't even remember those. There's like a vague memory of it, right? I think the value there is that, as far as development is concerned with a little tiny human being, you're imprinting behaviors from the age of birth to 7 years old. I mean, I started when I was 4. According to my cousins, they tell me stories, and according to the pictures, right? But I remember my first lesson officially in class as a student was 6. So, okay. Before that, it was mostly played martial arts with dad. And, your father is your superhero. Mm-hmm. If you're lucky enough to have a father, not everyone is. And I was very lucky to have a father and have a father that was pivotal in bringing about a revitalization of the Filipino martial culture here in California. And I got to grow up in that. So,
yeah. What form of, because there's an unmeasurable amount of martial arts from my understanding. What form of martial arts do you specialize in is like your thing?
So, I mean, the main martial art that I have in instructional experience and training experience in is Filipino martial arts, commonly known as Eskrima, Kali, or Arnis. And sometimes those terms are indicative of a regions like north, south, and central part of the Philippines. In other cases, it has to do with the lineage of your instructor and what they've decided to name their art at any particular time, or if they went into some kind of naming change, right? Mm-hmm. So, but in general, Filipino martial arts, some will argue that one name is older than another, but I mean, those things don't really change you as a martial artist. Mm-hmm. It's just a vocabulary thing, and it's more indicative of the history behind the art that you're learning or you're teaching.
So like martial arts is an art form, like you said. What separates all the different forms of art? Is it the way it's brought about, the way it's taught? Is it the way it's done? I mean,
martial arts is heavily influenced by politics.
Really?
It's influenced by religion. It's influenced by it's influenced by food. It's influenced by language, history, religion. It's influenced by all of the things that make us human beings, right? A lot of martial arts, as far as like combative knowledge, follows along the maritime, trade routes, right? Mm-hmm. So you'll see a cross-pollination of martial arts due to, people moving, right? In what is now known as the Philippines, what we would call Middle Eastern martial arts came 1,000 years before the word of Christ came, right? Because in the 1520s, Magellan or Magalesh, a Portuguese sailor who was flying under the crown and funded by the crown of Spain, right, discovered the Philippines with the help of a Filipino navigator, right, who was a slave named Jose, right? So, not all of the people that were on those boats were, or rather I should say ships, not all of them were Spanish, obviously, right? So there was definitely a Portuguese and a Filipino there. And so martial arts follows that, and it could be something as simple as teaching someone else a trick that you learned or watching a fight on board the ship and then picking something up. The way that I teach my students, there are 5 paths of learning. The first one is observation, right? You observe someone else doing something and see how it doesn't work, and you try not to repeat that, or you see something that does work and you want to know how that works. If you're clever enough, you might be able to figure it out yourself, or if you're bold enough, you might ask for a little bit of a lesson or a demonstration, right? Mm-hmm. And then the others are instruction, emergency, discovery, and exploration, right? So, for different people, having different kinds of experiences all throughout Southeast Asia, there's this big, interchange of experience, right? Noodles, where do they come from? Well, you find noodles in Italy, and you find them in the Philippines, and we ascribe that to coming from China, right? Mm-hmm. We don't know if that's the case because we don't know where they got it, right? But in the same sense, martial arts comes from all that stuff. Now, the biggest difference between a lot of those martial arts, as far as Filipino martial arts is concerned, it's one of the few martial arts that enjoys a contiguous passing on of the knowledge from ancient times through to modern times and utilized in the militaries of its ethnic origin, right? Mm-hmm. So Filipino martial arts is still used in the Philippine Marines. The Philippine Marines specifically are taught a form of Pakita Terchikali and other derivatives today that's under the Tortal family and Grand Tuhan, Leo Gahi, and a number of other people that have participated in doing that. Whereas Filipino martial arts as a cultural feature, it had recently in the last 15 to 20 years become the sport of the Philippines. Prior to that, it was basketball, and that's by and large due to a man by the name of Remy Presas, Grandmaster Remy Presas. He got that so that when you go to school, one of your PE activities was to do arnis, Filipino martial arts. So there's some differences there just in the modern times. Like the most recent big war that we could acknowledge Filipino martial arts being utilized is in World War II, in Okinawa first, and then in the Philippines by the 1st and 2nd Philippine Infantry and the 3rd Philippine Infantry Battalion that was actually trained here in California. Salinas, there's a war memorial for them. They were stationed out of Fort Ord, which is gone now. It's been and actually it's kind of interesting. I was a code enforcement officer for Marina, and I got to tour that area and interact with the people that were there as part of the Fort Ord Rehabilitation Authority. I think it was called FORA, yeah. So they started in Salinas, they started in San Diego, they started, in the Monterey area, the Monterey County, and then they shipped them out to Okinawa first, a lot of them, and then they went into the Philippines and fought for their country with the promise that they would get citizenship for those that were Philippine nationals, and then the Filipino Americans were also there fighting there. For the most part, those infantry units were officered by white Americans, and then they were the NCOs, and all of the enlisted men were Filipino in ethnic origin, if not national origin as well.
Wow. I love that. I'm in awe just listening right now. The amount of not only knowledge, but the history behind it too. I mean, it's not that I wouldn't expect it, mm-hmm. but just your knowledge behind it and being someone who is naive to it, clueless to it. Mm-hmm. Where did you? Is this taught to you through? Because you say it's about passing it down through the lineage. Was this taught to you, or was this something that you taught yourself upon, and the history behind it?
Both. I mean, like a large part of my history comes from my father, but a significant as well part of that comes from my uncle Dan Inosanto. So my uncle Dan is one of the most sought after Filipino martial arts instructors, or just martial arts instructors in the United States, in the world, really.
Wow.
He was a friend of my father's, a colleague, a peer, during the time when they were revitalizing the Filipino martial arts community in Stockton, California, in Los Angeles. My uncle Dan is out of Los Angeles. Currently, he's in Marina del Rey. And he is also the top authority in Bruce Lee's martial arts, Jeet Kune Do and Jun Fan Lee Kung Fu, right? So he was able to, with that platform, create a big voice. And he was a high school teacher to begin with, right? So he's a big historian, right? And I still learn from him, and I take it upon myself to try to learn as much as I can about the history. It's interesting, like here in California, like everyone does the mission project when you're like in third grade or something like that, and so you learn about Father Serra. Well, Father Serra's all of his bodyguards were called Soldado de Cuero, which is the soldiers of the skin, right? And every one of them was Filipino, or Manilaman at the time, they call them. The term Chino in Mexican vernacular, Mexican Spanish vernacular, comes from the Filipinos. There are villages or I should say towns in Mexico that are predominantly, as far as genetically speaking, Filipino. And the reason why that is if you look at it, the Spanish, when they found troublemakers in their colony in the Philippines, they just moved them to New Spain, which is what we call California now, right? And the troublemakers that they didn't like here, they would move to the Philippines. So I've been told by some historians that my name, Inay, which means mother, my last name, right? So like if you go to a common name for a Filipino restaurant is Inay's Kitchen, which means mother's kitchen, right? Comes from a derivation of the word nanay or nene, I believe, which is the Aztec word for mother.
Interesting.
Which is to say, conjecture-wise, that some of the Aztecs were too much problem for the Spanish here when they were colonizing, so they moved them to the Philippines to remove them from their base of power.
Wow.
Right? It's a very common thing for an invading force to do to reduce, dissent, right, and more easily quell the indigenous population, right? So, there's a lot of history there, and I learned that from the books that have been recommended to me by both my father and my uncle, their lectures, and then also, trading information with other, luminaries in the Filipino martial arts community. Because it's really important. It's not enough for us to learn how to hurt people. The old way in Filipino martial arts, a master could heal you and could also teach you how to hurt, right? And hurt, of course, for themselves as well. So,
what do you mean by heal? Like as in literally how to take care of yourself after those injuries inflicted upon an opponent, or
to take care of the injuries. Massage, herbology would be more along those lines. What we would call today chiropractics or facilitated massage, right, or stretching. So bone manipulation, those things are still present in Filipino culture today. It's called hilot today. It was called that then. It's confused with psychic surgery, which is different, right? But the massage is a very common thing to be taught, and there are other things that were taught to or was supposed to be taught by masters to their students. So even today, when I became an instructor under my father, I was required to go find a healing or any healer so that I could learn it. So I got certified as a massage therapist. Oh, right. So that I had something that I could do to help people. So it's the idea of giving and taking, of healing and hurting. It's like being both sides to be balanced. It's a useful skill set for martial arts because you have a little bit of better understanding of the anatomy, right? Which is important.
Definitely.
Right? If you want to achieve a high level of proficiency. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. To know the body, yours and your opponent's, right? Most definitely. As far as you mentioned instructing, is there any sort of process to go through to become an instructor? Is there any official way, or is it kind of thing like, hey, once you know so much, here you go? I mean, that's a very silly way of saying it, but again, naive. So tell me about that.
No, I mean, it's a fair comment. The problem with martial arts today is the standard isn't there. There isn't a standard. That's kind of the problem, right? Like, like you could get a black belt in 4 years. You can get a black belt in 10 years, right? Like you could become a master in 10 years. Some people aren't even a master, and they're just barely an instructor after 15 years. It depends on the teacher and the criteria. So a lot of times when we look at any kind of certification for any kind of authority whatsoever, we have to look at its criteria, right? And, for different schools and different organizations, it's different. Sometimes the bar is very low. Sometimes the bar is very high. I just recently tested 2 boys in the last week and a half. Boys, they're men. They're 20. Yeah. But I started teaching them when they were 5.
So to you, they're right. Yeah.
Right. And they're my boys.
Yeah.
Right. One of them even calls me uncle or dad sometimes. Like he's like, close, and the other one sometimes looks at me as a father figure, right? He's mentioned on a couple occasions, right? Because of the relationship that you get after that long. But they just got their Black Sash test, right? So, and to us, Black Sash just means that you're ready to train, right? That's like, teaching you in such a way where you understand the alphabet, you can recite it, you can form words, you can even form sentences. Now we can have a conversation, right? And in the same way, that's where our standard is, right? So, teaching martial arts, it depends on what you're teaching for. Does the person want to be able to defend themselves? I have another young man now who came up at the same time with them. He stopped quite a number of years ago, but he recently got attacked here in San Jose. He was bicycling to his work in the morning, and he got attacked by a knife-wielding homeless man. And while he did get cut a little bit, he was able to go home with very superficial injuries, relatively speaking, because of what I taught him. So there's that criteria. Can they defend themselves? There's lots of schools where, the instructor is teaching you how to fight, and they haven't been in a fight in 20 years or haven't been in a fight at all, let alone even a competitive fight. So they're teaching you self-defense, but they've never really had to use it for any great number of times. It's kind of like sending your kids off to learn swimming from an instructor that's never been in the water. So the criteria is different. And the thing is that some people, they're not seeking martial arts for that. It's because there's discipline, and that they learn self-control, they learn how to take direction. They also, hopefully, if the instructor is any good, also the student should be able to take constructive criticism to the point of it being maybe very unflattering, if not insulting, right? Because it's not enough to harden the body; you need to harden the mind too, right? And so that process, depending upon the criteria of the organization, right, is necessary, right? And with my organization, it is very necessary. I'm it's one thing for you to be able to defend yourself against attack, but what about all the mean words too? In fact, one of the guys that I learned from briefly at the behest of one of my teachers to go attend a seminar, he was saying, well, you got to do this. Right? And I was like, I'm not that interested, but you're my teacher, so I'll listen to you, I'll do it. And one of the things that he did was interesting. He began cussing at all the people that were attending the seminar. He was using every slur, every way to insult everyone, whether it was their gender, an assumed sexual orientation, the color of everything. And then he stopped and he said, if words are hurting you, then maybe martial arts is not the thing for you. Which I thought was a very powerful statement. Could have probably been communicated differently, but I thought that was a very powerful way to teach that lesson, because there was definitely an emotional reaction from everyone in the room. If not on behalf of themselves, if they felt insulted, they might feel insulted for someone else. But then for him to go, if words are hurting your feelings,
snapped out of it,
right? Because ultimately, martial arts is it's not a book club,
right?
It's not a sewing circle, and so whereas it can be for kids to be very, very approachable, and it needs to be, because martial arts should be for everyone. At some point, not only should the body be hardened, but the mind should be hardened. Otherwise, you don't have a tough spirit, right? So to become an instructor for my system, you have to go through that process just to be ready to train, and then from there, you have to be able to communicate what it is that you're teaching and what it means. And it has to be done in such a way that I can take the academic lesson, the didactic lesson, in a way where I can apply that to a situation that is not covered by the physical part of the curriculum, right? And so that's a little bit more difficult to do, right? A lot of, I often say that the skill of mentoring is gone by the wayside in the Western society, right? We produce people that maybe can remember facts, but they don't really understand the lessons, right? So, the way that we test is a very good example of that. Even a lot of the common commercial martial arts testing method is to get these students to basically cram in as much information so that they can regurgitate that information later. And that's what we do in academia now. Whether it's elementary school, high school or university or community college, there's very little critical thinking. And the thing is that I teach sword fighting. Eskrima means, the term that I typically use, it means to skirmish or to fight. It's a Latin derivated word. Eskrima would be the Spanish word for fencing, or the art of of defense. Escrime would be the French one, right? But in the Philippines, it's eskrima. And a practitioner of eskrima is called an escrimador, which means sword fighter, right? Sword fighting is not for dummies.
No.
Right? It's a game of inches and seconds.
Yes,
right?
definitely.
And there is a correlative relationship between how I maintain distance and how I can control time. And if I can do it really well, it's almost like magic, right? And you have to be able to teach critical thinking because fights don't happen on a matted floor with perfect lighting on a schedule. Right. Competitions do. And there's nothing taking away from that. Those guys that are out there doing the competitions, whatever it is, whether it's, professional grappling, whether it's MMA or boxing, those guys are fighters. That's not a fight what they're doing, though, right? Because there's rules and there's a referee. Fighting on the street or fighting in the war is going to be a completely different thing. You might feel like the person's trying to kill you. It's unlikely that anyone's going to die. When you're on the street, more likely. When you're in a war, very likely, right? And so Filipino martial arts, the eskrima that I teach, is derivated from an ancient warrior tradition that is essentially an old military secret. That's not a secret anymore because no one wants to fight with swords anymore, right? So the students have to understand that. And then they have to participate with other people's development that are beneath them in skill and experience and time so that we can see that they have an understanding. Because when you teach, you have to work through the problem in a way that you know that the communication is received. Because one of the sayings that I have in classes, what is taught is not always what is learned, and what is learned is not always what is taught. And so we have to be very specific with how we teach, the experiences that we create in training so that the person is better prepared for something that doesn't conform to what we've been training in class for, that they can adapt instantaneously to a new stimulus. Right? So that's a very medium length answer to your question of how I get someone to become an instructor. It takes a long time. Yeah. I have students that have been with me almost 20 years and they're just an instructor. Where I've met other guys that they have their students and their students are master instructors after 10 years. That's their criteria. You're barely an advanced student under me after 10 years. I don't feel compelled to make instructors in a short period of time, mostly because I've made so many in the last 22 years. Or rather, I should say, I've been lucky enough to be involved with their growth so that I could be comfortable telling my father, if he were still alive, that I think that this guy or this gal can teach at least the fundamentals, right? So that's, always the thing. You're the reputation of your teachers and your teachers' teachers, and so you have to take care of that, right? The more you water it down, the more you add to the forgetting of your teachers. Right. And that's not something that I want to be a part of.
I like that. I like that a lot, Jason. As far as you're talking about kind of how, we're still on the topic about how one becomes an instructor and a master and all this and that, to just, I guess, overall cover, would you say it's a time thing for sure as far as time of exposure to it? Because let's say there's someone with a heightened learning curve who picks it up faster, would you say, is that just subjective? Or differentiate situation?
There's a general frame for it, right? But I can teach someone to do something 1,000 times and it'll never come up in a fight. They'll never be able to surface it. They might just not have it, right? And I can teach someone something 3 times and they'll use it every time. So I have to understand those 2 outliers, right? Then there's also their ability to communicate, right? Some people are not meant to be instructors. And that's okay. Some people are not meant to be a black belt, and that should be okay too, right? It shouldn't be for everyone. And the reason why that is because there should be a sacrifice, and there should be a standard of not only ability, but also propensity, right? In order for you to make sure that this cherished art of mine, right, my beloved art is taken care of when I'm not here, right? So how much time? It's going to depend, right? But like, in most schools, they're going to run out of curriculum in about 10 years. If I were to teach, and I tell this to a lot of my students, if I were to teach my curriculum in a linear fashion, which I don't, I have a compound teaching structure, right? But if I were to teach it in a linear fashion, which is what most arts do, right, it would take me at least 30 years to teach it. Wow. All of it. And I have not taught any of my students all of it, right, because they don't put the time in. They have wives and kids and school and girlfriends and work and all those things are okay, and it's okay if they don't learn all of it, right? I'm not actually teaching anything that isn't there already, right? I just a little bit further along down the road and understand it a little bit differently and maybe a little bit better, depending upon your criteria. Some people will say not so much. Others will say, yeah, he knows a lot. Well, that depends on what we're comparing. It's a reference, right? But when you're asking about teaching to make sure an instructor is qualified, I mean, safety is an issue, maturity is an issue. Like I can teach someone for 30 years and they just never mature enough or show the right judgment in when or what they should teach with a student, that I shouldn't promote them up beyond whatever level they are, right? Because they won't be able to take that person to that next level. And that next level should be, like ultimately you shouldn't be able to be touched. That's that perfection that people say that you can't be achieved, right? But I mean, not everyone. Everybody in martial arts knows who Miyamoto Musashi is, should anyways. And he wrote the book of 5 Rings, right? He's in the Japanese culture called Kensai. He's the only one called Kensai, which means sword saint. He killed his first man when he was 14. Oh my goodness! Right?
Yeah.
By in that time in feudal Japan, you were a man. That's the other side of that, right?
Right.
But and it's not some kind of celebration of violence or hurting people. But the thing is that what the human body, what the human mind is capable of, and how they can either help or hurt with that sword. Yogi Munenori wrote the book, The Life-Giving Sword. It's the idea that by fighting, you can save others' lives, right? This is kind of the underlying idea of becoming a soldier and fighting for your country, right? Is that you're trying to protect life through, being assertive in whatever value or thing or people that we're trying to protect, right? So it's the idea. And that's a kind of maturity that you need as an instructor, because at some point you're going away from defense and you're going towards, I'm just going to hurt you first, right? And that kind of judgment requires maturity, and you can't give that to a 16-year-old. No. You can't have a 4th degree 16-year-old black belt if that's the criteria that you have as far as an instructor. If that's not your criteria, then have a 7th degree black belt that's 18 years old. That's fine, if that's your criteria. It's not mine. It's not my father's. It's not most martial arts schools, but it is there, right? It's part of it. So making an instructor is not merely time, but it is going to require time for maturity.
Definitely.
Right? It's ability, it's charisma, right? It's the ability to become articulate in the way that you teach, but also physical in the way that you teach, because it's not enough to be academic too. You have to actually walk the walk, not just talk the talk. Right. So that's that balance there.
Right.
And with those things, that maturity, maybe they can teach.
Maybe.
Yeah.
And so, okay, you mentioned the criteria factor of it too. So with your form of martial arts and fighting and so forth, what makes it unique? What differentiates it? So, I mean, like, for example, let's say, and again, maybe I'm totally wrong on this, but let's say like versus Taekwondo or something like that. What separates that to yours in this situation? Is there one?
No.
No.
Not really. So Taekwondo was came out in the 1950s, right? And the person, General Cho, I think, my Taekwondo friends will correct me later once they see this, but he was a Japanese naval officer, if I'm not mistaken, learned Shotokan, repurposed it and called it Taekwondo. So now we go to Shotokan. Shotokan is a Japanese karate. Japanese karate comes from Okinawan karate. Okinawan karate comes from Chinese Kung Fu Kempo, right? In every one of those evolutions, right, there was a military art, right? So it's no less efficacious, right? What constitutes a battle during those times is going to be different than, say, the Filipinos. Right? And the difference between that art and that lineage, if you follow that lineage, right? Some people don't subscribe to that history, but that's the history that I understand, right? That's a peasant art, right? That is a priest art. It's a weaponless art. The tools that they use, most of them, the bow staff, the tonfa, the sai, the nunchaku, not nunchucks, please, not nunchucks. The nunchaku or whatever. In the Philippines, they call it tabak toyak, right? Those are all farm implements, every one of them.
And this is to Taekwondo you're talking about, right?
Well, yeah, in Taekwondo, which they take a lot of their weapon arts from what we call kobudo, which is Okinawan weapon arts, right? No less deadly, but those are not necessarily the tools of the warrior class. You know, the Koreans had a warrior class. Hwangdo comes from that. It's another form of Korean martial art, right? The Japanese obviously had a warrior class. They're called the samurai, but they didn't do karate. They did jujitsu. Not the Brazilian jiu-jitsu you talk today. That's snuggle fighting, dangerous and hardcore, and I practice Brazilian jiu-jitsu. But for someone who's thinking that they're a samurai in Brazilian jiu-jitsu and you don't know how to handle a katana, probably shouldn't call yourself that, right? Not in terms of the truest sense of the word. These guys were a completely different breed of human being. They're akin to a Spartan. People say, oh, you're a warrior. I'm like, I don't know. A Spartan would carry 60 pounds of armor and weapons and gear plus their provisions and march a league 21 miles and then fight at the end of it. I can't do that. I can fight, but I can't do that, right? So, and then with almost no medical service, like, you're lucky if there's a bone saw in the surgeon's tent in those times. So, like, the training is different, the history is different. What constitutes a fight is going to be different. But in those times, that was a fight. That was, what was appropriate for a military man or person to fight. I mean, where it's feudal, it's going to be feudal times. It's definitely going to be a man in most cases, right?
Right.
That's what constitutes a military art. And so the Taekwondo is no less efficacious than or more efficacious than Eskrima or Krav Maga or jiu-jitsu or any of these other arts that are out there, right? It's for its space, it's good. It's like asking, well, is boxing better than kickboxing? What rules are we fighting by, right? Right? Is Eskrima better than boxing? Well, I mean, if I have no experience as a boxer and I have no boxing training whatsoever, which is not very common for most FMA practitioners, and I'm going to go into a boxing match against a boxer, well, the boxer will probably win even if I have that. But I'm not a boxer.
Right. I'm
a full contact stick fighter and sword fighter. That's what I do. Can I box? Yeah. Can I box against a professional boxer? Probably not.
Probably not.
I don't want to get in that. It's like trying to fight a guy that plays water polo in the water.
Right.
I mean, that guy is an athlete. It's a sport, but that's the art of drowning other people.
Right.
That's what that is, right?
Sure.
So it's no less or better. No lesser or better.
Right.
Just different.
Right. So would you say, as far as like, how does it connect? What specializes it, and what makes it unique? It just comes down to each form of martial arts lineage, kind of like you mentioned. No, not even that.
So what's common? Physics, geometry, psychology, physiology. That's the common through all of them, right? If we start there, we can have a meaningful conversation. Right. But if we go, well, my art's Korean, so therefore it's better than your Japanese art, or vice versa, or, I'm not only, like you guys do that stuff, but I'm Okinawan, and it's much better than your art, right? Because I do, Shirinjite or whatever it is that, Okinawan arts, right?
Right.
And then they go, oh, yeah, but that's not the real stuff because I do, Silung Gung Fu, right? Which is the other phrase for Shaolin Gung Fu, right? Or some other art, right? Like, it's still the same physics.
Sure.
It's still the same geometry. What changes is how I define victory, what tools are at use, right? Do I use poison? Some arts do.
Is that right?
Yeah.
What would some of those arts be?
Well, Filipino martial arts used poison. They used to believe that if you died by poison or disease, that your soul couldn't leave its body. Oh, so it was a psychological weapon, right? If not a theological weapon, right? A spiritual weapon, right? So different arts use different tactics, right? That doesn't mean that it's more deadly. I can't kill you more with my hands than I can with a sword. I'm going to have to kill you different. It might be more difficult. It might take more skill. The old Filipino tradition, which is not present in any of the arts or instructors that I've ever met since, but the old way was, oh, I like you. I'm going to teach you. You help protect the village, or you'll protect the king or whatever, the datu or the sultan or something like that. So I teach you how to fight with a sword. I like you a little bit better. I teach you how to fight with a stick. Oh, I trust you. Like maybe a distant cousin or a good friend, I'll teach you to fight with a knife. I love you and I trust you. I'll teach you how to fight with the hands. Only the most trusted students will learn how to fight empty-handed in Filipino martial arts.
Is that right?
Because you're deadly all the time.
Interesting.
Right? As opposed to like, oh yeah, that guy only knows sword. He could probably hurt me with his hands, but he's not deliberately dangerous with his empty hands. Filipino martial arts encompasses all forms of combat, and they're better at some than others and not as good at others than some, right? But in its totality, it's a very wide spectrum of knowledge. But the common thing is geometry, physics, right? Physiology and psychology. I mean, you could have the best technique, right? And you could be physically powerful enough to do those techniques, right? And you could have the right physics applied at every time. So you have the right timing, the right placement, and all of those things. But if you don't feel like fighting, or you're afraid to fight, or you no longer want to hurt somebody because you've taken a peaceful path, you're never going to succeed,
right?
Because you have to be willing to do that. And so the difference between the martial arts really is going to come down to, like, other than its lineage, its structure. There are 5 formats for teaching martial arts. There's forms. Everybody's familiar with forms. If you watch Karate Kid, you're watching Cobra Kai now, everybody's familiar with forms and kumite, the hand fighting, they're familiar with that. And then you look at, like, say, boxing. They learn basic technique, which is another format. And then they learn drills, which is another format. And then they spar, which is the 4th format, right? Mm-hmm. Right? And the 5th format is being able to explain all that stuff, right? So not all schools use all 5 formats. Not all arts use the 5 formats, but really good instructors will be able to convert any piece of information from one format to the other, so that depending upon the needs of the student, going back to mentoring on by the wayside by our culture, right, they can then help that student get past a learning block, right? Because you shouldn't have plateaus, right? And that's one of the most common things that martial arts practitioners encounter within their 10th year, right? By their 10th year, they've experienced some kind of plateau.
Like learning plateau? Is that what
they're not getting better?
Yeah.
Right? So, I mean, the best example is Madonna, right? So Madonna's a bad girl, right? That's 80s, like a bad girl, whatever, like a virgin, all that stuff, right? But then she reinvents herself throughout her career several times and then gets this bigger following. And then it's this bell curve relationship, right? At the point of diminishing returns, I have to change the way I'm doing things, or I don't continue to grow. I actually decline in my ability. Right. And in the same sense, you need to be able to do that in your training. And understanding all the things which we call in the Inay system of Eskrima now, the cipher, this academic knowledge that my father passed on to us, we can address a student's particular needs, change the exercise of the drill so that they create new experiences for themselves. Because like a good fighter is experienced, skillful, knowledgeable, right? They have the attributes to do all those things, and they have the psychology to do it. They're willing to do it.
Interesting.
Right. So
that's interesting. I love hearing how, like, dynamic this all is. For someone naive to, it's Eskrima. Am I pronouncing that correct? Eskrima, yes, or just martial arts in general, where I'm just clueless to it all. Mm-hmm. How deep it really goes. Mm-hmm. I mean, and all the way it translates to real life in so many aspects that, again, someone like me is clueless to it. Yeah. So while we're on the topic of martial arts, I'm on my camera here. I want to show this. I want to talk about this magazine you brought here. I thought this was super awesome. Why don't you talk a little bit about this? This is the Martial Arts at its Best Masters magazine for fall 2022. And we got Mr. Jason himself on the cover here. I mean, big time. So tell me about this. How'd you end up here with these
First,
guys?
As far as that magazine cover is concerned, I want to say thank you to editing like Photoshop, because if it wasn't for my friend, my dear friend, taking that, I'd look as old as I look right now.
Oh, come on.
But, you know... it was just a fun journey. You know, like, I've been interacting with this publisher. He publishes DVDs, and then he has a self-published magazine that has, a small following in print, but then he sends out a lot of the digital copies, right? There's up to 80,000 in the distribution, any particular issue. Like my mission from my father when he passed was to preserve and propagate Filipino martial arts, specifically the Inay system of Eskrima. So getting on a cover and getting that kind of publicity is, as moderate as it is just another box to tick. Yeah, right. No, it's
awesome.
It is pretty cool. It's fun, and it's very exciting for me and for my students and things like that. But it's mostly just to keep our presence. I mean, it's funny. No one knows what Eskrima is, but if I named off some movies where Eskrima was like the main feature in the fight choreography, you're like, oh, I've seen that before.
What are some of those movies? Let's hear.
Most of the Bourne movies.
Is that right?
Most of the Bourne movies have Filipino martial arts in them. Yeah,
that's so neat. I had no clue. Like you just said, I wouldn't have known that. But because prior to sitting down talking with you, and even before we planned this, I'd never heard of Eskrima. I didn't know what it was, And
the first Tomb Raider with Angelina Jolie, when she's doing those 2 sticks. Yeah, that's Eskrima. What's it? Rob Schneider, when he was in that thing, he was doing the 2-stick thing, and he was in the prison or something like that. Yeah, that's the same art. Same fight choreographer, if I'm not mistaken, as well, right?
So how come it's not known? How come people don't talk about it and know that, oh, that's Eskrima right there, Or if someone can see, for example, again, just because I'm clueless, oh, that's Taekwondo right there, but not Eskrima.
I think that, I mean, one of my students, he's an MBA. He goes, the problem with Filipino martial arts as a community is we don't even know what to call ourselves. Are we Kali? Are we Arnis? Are we Eskrima? Like, there's this system and that system and this instructor and it's really difficult from a marketing standpoint, right? It's difficult because no one can agree. Right. What's the name of the style? What are the name of the instructors? Like, what are their titles? What do they mean? Right, and all those things. It's difficult for someone to, unless they just center around a personality, and then that's going to be polarizing by itself, right?
Right.
Any particular personality. So that's why, right? It's out there. It's always been there. We used it in World War II on the side of the Allies against the Axis. So the Filipinos were fighting against the Japanese in the Philippines, who were on the side of the Nazis, right? So it's there. It's been in there. But at the same time, it's just no one knows what to call it.
Yeah.
Right. And so when you can't put a label on things, right, it's very difficult for you to market that thing.
Sure.
Right. So the Arnis as a prevalent term is as much historical as it was about marketing. So is the term Kali, right? Spelled Kali, right? Is as much about marketing today as it is about its lineage right now, because there's a lot of people that say Kali is the mother art or Kali is the superior art. Sure, maybe, I don't know. Like, it doesn't change. I've had instructors who call their art Kali, right? And I swing my sword the same way, right? I have other teachers that they preferred the term Arnis, right? And I still swing my sword the same way, right? So it's still geometry, physics, and physiology. And so I think that's part of the problem, right? How do you get a message out when we don't have a clear message?
Yeah.
Right.
See, I'm starting to see it's starting to clarify now. It makes sense. That
Right.
It's all these different forms, but all these different names, you can use it. So makes sense. So I want to call back on something you mentioned here not too long ago, as far as an instructor who might have the knowledge, but it's not applied. And I want to take that moment to kind of connect. Okay, what do you do outside of this? You told me you have another job with law enforcement and how you apply it.
So I started in security. Actually, I started doing security when my father was still around, right? He would get, every once in a great while, he would get like a thing to do. I remember the most memorable thing that we did was security for the Scottish Highland Games in Felton.
Oh.
Right. And so, that's the first experience. I was thinking I might have been like 18. I might have even been 17 at the time. I'm not even sure. But, doing event security and, there's a little bit of confrontation there, right? And so, so it starts there, right? And then, when he passed, almost as soon as he passed, I'm looking for something to do. I was a technical recruiter at the time, working for an agency, right? And doing very well for myself, but then my father passed, and he had 3 to 5 years of seminars booked. And 75% of his clientele, his students, wanted me to be their teacher, right? Not everybody, but most, right? So I committed to that. I stopped my job. So I'm like, okay, what do I do with the rest of my time? I'm going to teach classes. Okay, but what am I doing with the rest of my time? So I eventually became a bouncer. I bounced on and off for 20 years. Okay. And bouncing is getting paid to say no in the hospitality industry and get hit.
Yeah.
Right? You're the guy that gives the bad news, right?
Uh-huh.
And in popular bars, that's every night.
Yep.
So you get into pushing and shoving matches to call an ambulance fighting situations. Right. So it started there, right? And then there was a time where I needed to make more money besides bouncing, and it was decided. My partner and I at the time, she didn't want me to be a bouncer anymore. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, okay, what do we need to do? I need to make more money. I'm like, I'll try fugitive retrieval. So I got licensed in the state of California to become a fugitive retrieval agent.
Which is, for the watered down term, bounty hunter.
Bounty hunter. Yeah.
Bounty hunter. Yeah. And so you got, which is a legendary title. I mean, when you meet a bounty, because I know I have it. I mean, it's like, okay, well, this guy's dope, but which is cool though. Beyond that, jokes aside, I think it's really cool you do that. So tell me about it.
I mean, it's not very different from the eyes of the person that's getting arrested as being a police officer. You have a badge, you have a gun, right? You're there to arrest them. You take them to jail. It's very simple.
Deliver the bad news.
What people don't see is the due diligence that's behind it, the hours and hours of surveillance, right? The open source intelligence gathering, right? All of those things that you need to do to make sure that what you're doing is legal, right? Because you don't have the protection of a law enforcement agency. You're enforcing a private civil contract between a bail bond agency and their defendant who has bailed out and decided not to go to court, right? And then law enforcement individuals that are sworn agents, right? They are compelled, right? Whereas I'm not a sworn law enforcement agent. I'm not compelled to go after a felon or anything like that. They'll look at the fugitive retrieval agents in some lights as like, oh, you're less than a police officer because, you didn't have to do whatever it is that they have to do, which is difficult, right? I did have to go through some of the courses that they have to go through, right? And qualify with my firearm as much as they do, if not more in most cases, right? So it depends on which side of that you're looking at, what it's like, right? I mean, there's lots of paperwork. The ability to articulate yourself in a way on paper so that you get favorable judgments from the Superior Court is an important part of being a fugitive retrieval agent or bounty hunter, right? Understanding the technicalities that might exonerate a bond, which basically means that the bail bond company is no longer responsible for that person, right? Is an important part of it. But then there's the other part, the exciting part, where you're chasing people down the road or they're chasing you, right? Or, you're taking someone to the hospital because it was a bad arrest, or you're going to the hospital because it was a bad arrest, right? So there's all of those things that people want to hear about, but there's all the other things that are important too. And then there's also your ability to make friends with people that are not inclined to be your friends, right? You need to be able to talk to them in a way where maybe they don't like you, but they feel that they're respected, right? Like there's lots of people that take from the world, right? Giving back is really, really difficult, right? A lot of people want to take value from society. They want to take value from stores and restaurants and friendships or even associations. Giving value is a much more difficult thing to do. And for me, that was part of what appealed to me. One, I could have a better living situation, which is what my partner really wanted. I could also continue teaching martial arts, but I could also give back to society in a way where, I'm arresting child molesters, rapists, I arrested drug dealers, right? I repeat offenders for driving under the influence, right? And then, all manner of other individuals that had, mostly drug and prostitution, charges and things like that. So, I'd like to think that I helped a few people here and there.
Definitely. I would say so.
It's what other people don't see is when we have to reach into an investigation because we're having such a hard time, and we have to see the human tragedy behind all that, right? You have to see, the homeless prostitute who's developmentally challenged, a grown woman physically, mentally maybe 12, right? And getting paid with Barbie dolls and canned food, right? That's the part that they don't see, right? Yeah. So it was an interesting experience, and I value the experience, and I came away. Now I feel healed from it, but that was I haven't arrested someone in like 3 years, 2-3 years. I've gone out recently, just for fun. Yeah. Right. People say, "Hey, can you help me with a case?" I say, "Sure, I'll take a look. I'm working, I'm doing these things, but let me take the paper. Let me take a look at it. Let me give you some advice. I'll walk with you, stuff like that. I've only done that once." And I helped another investigation out for someone else too recently that was getting harassed and kidnapped, and a bunch of other stuff was involved with that. So I was, mostly doing networking with it. So I still like to do that, right? Because again, we live in a world of takers, and somebody's got to give. Yeah. Right.
So I love that, Jason. I want to real quick, because I feel like a question some people may have, or even myself on top of that is when it comes to the calls that you're going upon in your past with this and the people you're going after who had these warrants, how come that isn't something law enforcement, a police officer would do? But how come, is it like put out to first come, first serve?
Not at all.
How does that work?
So most of the time warrants are served by sheriffs, right? That's provided if the county is funded well enough so that they can have officers that only work on warrants, right? So if we legislate against funding them and they got to do something else, they have to take the funds that they have and they have to put them somewhere else in order to do their job, the warrants are less important. So now they just hope that the person gets stopped in a traffic stop, or maybe a domestic violence call, or maybe some crime call where someone got in a fight, or, something like that. Yeah. And then that's why they run your warrants. They ask for your ID, and they hope they catch you on a warrant that way, right? Yep. These people naturally were, as far as bail fugitives are concerned, they were at some point in custody, right? Were either released on their own recognizance, right? Either in the field or after they were processed in the jail, right? right, with the promise that they would go back to jail. They would go back to court. Or they were in jail after being arrested, and then they got released on bail, right, and promised to come back. Yeah. They promised the court, and they promised their bail agent, right? And then they don't. And so then a bench warrant is issued by the court, which Sheriff's Department and any other law enforcement agency can act upon, right? But as I mentioned, they're not funded well enough necessarily to always do that. There's a lot of people out there, right? And, setting aside the argument of whether they should have a case or not, right? Just set that aside, right? The bail agent is still responsible for that person. So, less than 1% of the people that go through and exercise their Eighth Amendment right for bail actually skip and fail to appear. And of the people that do, that are above that 1%, they forgot. And so they ask for a reschedule, and they get the reschedule, and they get back on track. Right. But there's a small percentage, about 1% or so, that run and fight back, right? And everyone's looking for them. The difference is that, our municipal agencies are not necessarily funded well enough to always look for every single person, right? So while the bail company and the bail agent are still on the hook, they're going to pay for investigators to go and look for them.
Gotcha.
Right? And the bail contracts, at least in the state of California, give them the right to do that. So that's why that's it. I mean, that's a really good question, and we would wish that it's such a black and white answer, right? But it isn't. And the reason why is because, a lot of the public, especially here in California, are not really all that in favor of law enforcement until they need them.
Right. Until you need them. And
it's like car insurance, right?
Yeah.
No one likes paying car insurance.
No one does.
Until you need it.
Exactly.
Right? No one likes the law enforcement until it's your little girl that's hurt, right? Or your car that's been smashed in and the guy drove away, or any number of other things that could happen, right? Then when you feel a sense of injustice, you want justice, but you voted against it.
Yeah.
Oh, well.
I like that. I like that call to that. That's really important that you brought that up. I think that's good. I want to ask if you're comfortable with sharing what, in your past with it, what's an experience look like? Maybe what a call would look like upon that.
It's not really a call, right? You get a case.
Well, a case, you're right.
Right? So I held as many as 30 cases at a time. I think I started with 3 cases when I first started. I remember my partner, Rudy, he goes, you ready? He was a big guy, right? He's easily 100 pounds heavier than me. Like, he's a big guy, right? Well, not 100, but he was a big guy. Yeah. Anyways. And I go, a whole lot of nothing? And he goes, you're going to do good. Because you get your cases, and so you check custody, you check if the case is still live, you make sure that the warrant's still active, all of these things that you have to check before you go out and do your investigation, right? And then you do surveillance. You get addresses, you get tips, you get ideas, you talk to people, right? And you find stuff out, right? And so you go and look. Sometimes you're looking in the same place. I mean, I've sat surveillance in very dangerous places for months, right? Every day, Well, not every day. I worked 4 10s, so 4 10-hour days, right? But every day of my work week, I would go out there, I'd sit at that spot, see if I see anything. Meanwhile, I'm on my phone, searching on social media, searching wherever it is that I can find anything, right? Looking at court documents, right? Calling the police department, asking for questions, things, just trying to find information, right? I don't want to give too much tradecraft out because it's no fun for the people that are still doing the job. But, you're doing your investigation, you're doing your due diligence at every point, because you got to make sure that you're on the side of the law. You don't want to take away someone's rights or do something that'll get yourself in trouble.
Right.
So then, that's the first part. But, eventually you figure out where the person is, right? And like any good hunter, you don't go, I remember the first time I went out, I'm like, so what are we going to do? We're going to go out at 2 a.m. and knock on their door while they're in. And the guy, the lead investigator at the time, and I was contracting. Like, I get one opportunity. I was like, hey, I need you at this time. The guy looks at me and goes, did you want to get shot in the face? Because that's how you get shot in the face. And I go, no. And he goes, okay, so what we're going to do is we have the address. We're going to go in at 7 a.m. when they're passed out. And then we're going to see what happens. Right? And so you have to be smart, right? You don't go into the lion's den hunting lion. You wait at the watering hole. Right? And the reason why I say lion is because there are people that are predators in this world. The ones that womanize. Womanizers are predators of weak women that need validation from men, right? That's what they do, right? So they'll wait till the woman is drunk, right? They'll never have an interaction with a sober woman, right? Not at least the first interaction, right? There are people that fool people into giving them things, so they swindle them. So these are predators that prey upon the weak or the unaware or the naive or the disadvantaged. Just like any other predator, like lions don't go after the strongest in the herd; they have to go after the old, the sick, and the young. Right. And then there are other predators. Law enforcement are predators that prey upon predators. That's what we do, right? We look for the people that are preying upon the people that we're supposed to be protecting, right? And so, as a good predator, I wait till you go to your watering hole. Where do you get your gas? Where do you like to go get coffee? Or whatever it is, right? Usually it's where does mom live, right? Or something like that. Right. So you figure out where they are, right? And I won't go into exactly how you figure out there, but you figure it out, right? And then you wait for a good time. You don't go for the time when there's them and 20 of their homies. Although that happens sometimes, right? I remember one time we were like, we're going to do a door knock, me and my supervisor. The guy asked to be a big deal. It's a very small warrant, or no big deal. Kid's like 19 years old. It was one of the worst fights I've been in, right? I'm fighting him and I'm getting him in a shoulder lock, and my partner, my supervisor, pulls on him. So I fall on this guy. And meanwhile, my boss essentially is doing a really good job of not letting this guy's hand go because he's trying to reach to his pocket. I don't know why. I'm concerned with the rest of him. So I end up what we call in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu a knee on belly or knee on chest. And I'm starting to tie him up again. And then through the tussle, whether it's my boss pulling on him or something like that, I end up underneath him. So I do what's called a body triangle. Basically, I'm hugging him with my legs in a way where he can't get out. He's still trying to get to his pocket. There's a pit bull above my head, and there's 3 other of his friends that are trying to come after us, and I'm having to tell them to stay away, and I had to draw my gun and do all that stuff, and it was a crazy fight. This guy fought all the way to the car until we got into the car. And once we got into the car, I got him arrested, and that was like, so we got him handcuffed eventually, right? And the only reason why I got handcuffed is because I put my pistol in his chin, right? I'm like, you move again, and I'm pulling the trigger. I'm just done. Because there's a pit bull barking at me, 3 homies that want to give me the boot. I'm done, right? Boss was mad at me because I drew my gun, but I felt justified. And I think that you can articulate the fear of your life with 3 other people coming plus a pit bull that might get involved. The girlfriend was holding the pit bull back, right? But who knows when she's going to lose control of that dog, right? And then we don't even know if the dog is violent, right? But it's a pit bull, so, right? Finally, get him in handcuffed, get him in the car, and then he's calm as night. He's just totally fine, right? Finally processes the drill. I'm like, what was that about? And he goes, you don't understand. He's a gang member. He just got credit in front of his homies for fighting off 2 bounty hunters. When he gets out, he's going to get respect. Yeah. And that's the environment that you have to thrive in as a fugitive retrieval agent. It's crazy. That's what the call ends up being like sometimes. Sometimes it's like, oh, you got me. Like the nicest guy I ever arrested had a huge swastika on his neck. Right? Huge. Like, I'm thinking he's going to hate me. Yeah. I mean, I'm clearly not fair-skinned, right? I don't have blue eyes. I'm figuring this guy's going to give me the hardest time. People of color gave me more hard time than this guy ever gave me, right? I was like, you got me, sir. I'm like, all right.
That's it?
He goes, I won't do nothing. I won't even fight. Just let me say goodbye to my boy and my girl. I said, you can't go in there. You can call them out. And he says, that's fine. I ain't running. And he has like a country twang. Yeah. Born and raised here in California, but he had a country twang to the way he spoke, which I thought was weird. I asked him later, where's your accent from? He said, I was born here. I'm like, all right, right? Huge. Like you're never going to miss that, right? And he was polite. I'm not like, deluding myself and thinking that he liked me or that he was my friend, but he was courteous and he was polite, right? All he wanted to do was say goodbye to his son, hug his girl, and not be handcuffed in front of his boy. That's all he asked. I said, no problem. We can walk out to the car. Kids will go away, and I'll handcuff you then. And he was totally okay. So it's also like people have like this preconceived notion of people, stereotypes. And the reason why stereotypes are useful is because they're often correct, right? Our brains are geared to generalize. Like imagine if you had to calculate every different kind of doorknob every time you encountered a doorknob to determine if it's a doorknob. Your brain has to do that, and you have to understand that. And so stereotypes are a natural part of just kind of categorizing and labeling the world so you can get around more quickly, right? But they don't serve you all the time, and it certainly didn't serve me in this case because I'm expecting a fight, and I was pleasantly surprised with, oh, You're going to go totally easy. You were totally on the run, but I got you, so you're cool. Right? Who knows? Maybe he wanted to go in for whatever reason, or he just wanted to get it cleared up for whatever reason, or that's just the way that he is. Who knows? But like, if you saw him in the street, you'd think, oh man, that guy's white. That's a white supremacist. I mean, like, not even a turtleneck would cover that. You'd see it because it went all the way up to his chin.
Oh, his chin.
Yeah. Right. So I mean, calls as you call it, the cases are different, right? Yeah. Some people are really easy to find. Some people are hard to find. Sometimes it's the first door you knock on. There they are. Sometimes it's the 5th time you've knocked on the same door over the last 7 months. You never know, right? So it was interesting. The difference, though, in terms of law enforcement is that I'm always dealing with a criminal. Or I'm only looking for and to deal with or interact with a criminal. In the sense that they have a charge, they're running from the charge. That's a little bit suspicious. We still refer to them as defendants. We don't refer to them as perpetrators or convicts, or even if they are convicted from something else, they're a defendant in a case that we're responsible for. Right? And we got to bring them to court so that they appear in court and they deal with their court issues, whatever they are. Right. So bounty hunting was a good experience, and I got to use my martial arts, mostly the psychological part. Right. Mostly.
What did that look like as far as the psychological side of it?
Being able to deal with confrontation, having someone insult you in every way possible about your gender, about the color of your skin, the shape of your eyes, right? Your sexual, preference, or how you might achieve sexual gratification, all of those things, while you take them to jail and not lose it.
Yeah.
Right? Because like you can only, in very high stress environments like that, you can only take so much of that.
Definitely.
Before you're like, I'm really upset now.
Right.
Right? So it's different. Some days it was funny and other days it wasn't.
Yeah. Right?
And some days it's just like, all right, here we go again. And then, like the kind of crazy things like arresting a crazy lady who refused to keep her clothes on. Like, how do you deal with that? I can't haul off and punch her while she's fighting me in the car, right? Because I got to explain how she got hurt. She looks different from when we arrested her than when we get her to the jail. You can't explain that stuff. So how do you fight that person off?
Right.
Like, so there's like all those different kinds of experiences, right? Like, but like I can honestly say I fought a crazy woman naked she was naked. I was fully clothed, right? But for almost 45 minutes while she tried to jump out of a moving car on a freeway, right? Like,
wow,
crazy.
Yeah.
Right. That's enough to set you off for a little bit. Like you might need a drink after that. Or
yeah, no kidding.
Maybe a talk with your pastor. In fact, that job drove me to the church. I started going to church because of that job.
Is that right?
Yeah. Because I needed something that was beautiful. I needed something that was wholesome. I needed something that was nurturing to balance out that mess, right? That we as a society create, right? So, yeah, it's a good job.
That's so cool. I mean, that's cooler than I could have expected to be, and beyond insightful too. I want to ask just one last thing about and sorry if you already mentioned it, but what would you say if you were to put it on one thing? What led you away from it? Just dangerous, and hey, I'm done with that.
I live in the Bay Area. I mean, the most I ever made was like maybe $60,000 or something like that. No medical benefits.
Yeah,
like very little. I had dental and vision. I didn't have medical benefits. Right. I had a lot of freedom. Right. So, but like it's like. While I like the black and white of it, like, like normal society, you can interact with someone and get a sense that, this is not a good person. You would never want them. Yeah, like I have this bar. If I can't introduce you to my mom, my sister, or my daughter, I don't want to talk to you.
Yeah.
Right. But in normal polite society, I have to talk to you.
Right.
Right. When you're in that kind of environment, you can talk to them exactly as they appear to be. Right. And you can be confrontational because that's the nature of that role.
Right.
Right. Whereas if I'm at a restaurant, at a drinking establishment, right, for a party or just for the fun of it, whatever it is, there's a gray area that I have to abide by, right, which can be tedious at times.
Sure.
Especially if you've seen all the things like people who involve themselves in drugs. That's the same pathway that human trafficking goes through, and I've been in human trafficking houses. You're contributing to that. You should be ashamed, right? And anybody who would knowingly interact with that person, you should be ashamed too, because you're guilty by association. That person is not good for the tribe, right?
Yeah, that's interesting for sure. So, I mean, crazy story. I mean, I think crazier than I could have ever imagined. You have seen what seems like 2 lives, if not more than that, with everything you've done. And
I'm only halfway done with my life.
and that's the thing. I mean, you got so much to go to. I can't wait to hear what's more. So, as we wrap things up here, is there anything you wanted to kind of wrap up with, exit with? Anything you'd like to mention?
You know, people say, well, should I do martial arts? I think it's incumbent upon you to be able to protect yourself. No one's coming to save you, right? Like, and turning the other cheek is a great idea. I mean, I go to Episcopal church, right? I subscribe to a lot of the Catholic Christian ideals, right? And though I'm not a saint, I am definitely a sinner, right? You know, you owe it to yourself and you owe it to your children to teach them, whether it's boxing or something, just to be able to stand up for themselves. You can't expect other people to say, well, bullying's not okay, or, just turn the other cheek. What all that does is embolden the predators. Right? If there's no consequence for being a bad person, you just continue being a bad person, right? So, I think that, for people, as long as the martial arts is involved in alignment with our conversation about, like, someone who has experience with that, I think that's important. Who has an ethos, right? Like, they're teaching some certain set of ethics. I mean, the samurai had the code of Bushido, the knights had the code of chivalry. Ancient Greece, they had their civics and ethics that they have, right? Most warrior classes had that, right? Like, very commonly in a lot of karate schools, taekwondo schools, it's like, courtesy and respect, indomitable spirit, right? Those kinds of things. For my family system, it's honor, respect, veracity, which is truth, justice, ethic, loyalty, discipline, rule, and conduct. Like, trying to abide by, and you're never going to always be successful in that. But, like, teaching that in a way where the person's accountable for that so that they're self-accountable is important. You can do that a lot of different ways. I personally don't think that soccer and ballet class and, those things, football camp, I don't think no one goes on their senior trip. So one of my buddies, Todd, he says, no one goes on their senior trip traveling Europe, and it's a very common thing here in the West, if not in California, right? Where they get to go do their Euro trip with their buddies after they graduate high school and say, geez, I'm sure glad when I almost got mugged in the mean streets of Madrid that my daddy sent me to coding camp. No one's going to say that. Sorry. Coding is a really good skill. I'm a technical recruiter. I'm constantly looking for engineers all the time in my day job, but no one says that. Right. No one says that at all.
No.
People should learn how to defend themselves, if only just to understand confrontation, right? Because confrontation is every day. Right, like you've probably not been in a fight in a long time, if at all, but you would not disagree with me when I say that you're constantly fighting for your success. You're constantly fighting against the economy. You're constantly fighting, for what you think is right and what you need in your life, right? And martial arts is one of the best ways to teach people how to deal with conflict, how to resolve that conflict both in a physical and also non-physical way if it's a good school.
Yeah.
Right, and I think that, my life is an example of that. Although I haven't always chosen the peaceful route. Sometimes, violence is the answer.
Yeah. Yeah, not entirely wrong. Well, Jason, thank you so much for joining me. I really do appreciate it. I mean, you are first of all, incredibly intelligent dude, well-rounded, and you had so much to share. I can't thank you enough. And like I started this, badass. I mean,
it was a pleasure, man. I had fun.
Yeah, it was a blast. So I really look forward. I think people are going to love this. So thank you so much. So, all right, folks. Well, that's the show. I hope. Wrong camera angle. That's the show, folks. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you guys really liked it, make sure you guys be a friend and tell a friend. If you enjoyed it, your buddy, your mom, whoever's going to enjoy it too. And make sure if you're on YouTube, like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. And let us know what you thought. Let us know what you thought about Jason's story. If you can relate, if you've been in a fight, haven't been in a fight, let us know. So thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it. And I'll see you guys on the next one.